Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the millions who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Fly, Eagles, fly on the road to victory. Fight, Eagles, fight. Score a touchdown, 1, 2, 3. Hit 'em low, hit 'em high. And remember that guy, the show we remind our members for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks, I'm one of your hosts, James.
E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles. If you listened on Monday, which came out after the game, but if you somehow knew how confident I was, you already knew what it was going to be. Diaz back with you. The Eagles fought really hard, but we have a very special guest. He is a person who the Lakers fought very hard to get off of their team. Please introduce yourself.
That's right. It's me, Mark Williams, and I'm still trying to find my way back to LA. Charlotte cannot hold me. I swear my back is fine. I swear all of my other appendages are fine. Please let me play with Luka. I do not want to be in Charlotte anymore.
Diaz, take it away, baby.
Look, there are enough other podcasts that are going to go in depth on just how the Eagles massacred Kansas City in front of the whole world. Really just a beautiful evening for beefs being permanently settled. Kendrick obviously eviscerating Drake.
It was a night of haters. Truly, like, the best evening for haters in a long time.
It was a hater's paradise. And look, there's enough other podcasts that are going to tell you about how great Jalen Hurts was and how they keyed on Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown with his inner excellence and Jalen Carter just being an absolute monster. But that's not what this podcast is. This is a podcast for the guys, by the guys. So I just want to shout out a few of the guys on the Eagles along the way that really just helped to make this season special. Obviously, we talked last season about Trotter Sr. I got to shout out Jeremiah Trotter Jr., special team stud this year, doing the axe chop well after the game was already settled, but he did do the axe chop, which was very important, for our brand, for his brand. And you saw the video of Trot Sr. picking up Trot Jr. once more as the confetti fell.
It's a beautiful thing.
It was so beautiful. And I had talked on this podcast about how the Nakobe Dean injury potentially paved the way for Trotter Jr. to get more regular snaps, but that instead fell to Oren Burks, who has probably the best redemption story on a team that also just has their own redemption arc, but his own personal redemption arc, because last year, when Dre Greenlaw went out for the Niners, I think that's really what turned the tide in that game. The Niners defense was firing all cylinders. Dre Greenlaw went out, and in came his backup, Oren Burks, who was relentlessly targeted. Travis Kelce feasted, and obviously that's got to sit really heavy with somebody, and especially for him to be a backup, you don't know if you're going to get your shot at redemption. Certain things have to happen that you're not rooting for, but injuries, bad luck, whatever it may be, has to happen for Oren Burks to be able to step in. And I mean, Kelce had 4 catches, I think. And one of them was on that bullshit forward pass, past the line flick, but it was already 34-0. I so loved how there were more blatant holds and blatant penalties by the Chiefs when the game was 34-0. And the refs were just let's speed this up. We all know what's happening.
Do you think they were offered a running clock in the third quarter?
I so wish. The thing is that the NFL wouldn't allow it because they still need to get in all those commercials that everybody paid for.
Weird flesh out to be man.
Right. But and that annoyed me so much when they reviewed the Dotson non-touchdown at the start. And Jahan Dotson is another guy worth shouting out. First round pick, failure in Washington. Doesn't look like he's going to have much of a career. The Eagles maybe overpay to get him in as the wide receiver 3, but it's all worth it for that big catch that looked like a touchdown at first, down to the 1. And I don't know why we had to have 5 minutes of commercials after very clearly seeing that he was down short. But, tush push, it's fine. Chris Jones faked a neck injury right after, which was very pathetic. You just got beat up by our bigger guys. Another bigger guy that I want to shout out, Devin Steen, because, and with Mekhi Becton also being a guy on that line and having his own incredible story of Jets flame out, has to come to Philadelphia, starts a new position, goes to Stoutland U, gets his master's by the time the season starts, becomes a great lineman. But we had a lot of injuries on our interior line between Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, and Becton. All of them missed significant snaps between the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. And in steps Devin Steen. And what does he just do? He does his job. He doesn't do anything fancy. There was no massive crushing block that led the way, but there was just steady protection. One of those guys that's just so important. We love the long snappers, and, it gets lost in the fold because we talk about the 2-time Eagle champions that there are. Obviously, there's BG. Obviously, there's Lane Johnson. They're on the Mount Rushmore. Jake Elliott had his own ups and downs, stepped up with the most points for a kicker ever in Super Bowl history.
Have I gotten to tell you that our friend Evan, not Evan from Guys with Baseball, just our personal friend Evan, got to watch the game with Jake Elliott's dogs because one of his friends dog walks for Jake Elliott?
That's unreal. That's fascinating. Shout out Evan. Shout out Jake Elliott's dog. Shout out Jake Elliott with the 16 points. But also shout out the fourth Eagle, who is now a 2-time Super Bowl champion, Rick Lovato. We love the long snapper. The long snapper, much like a referee, much like an umpire, they're only noticed when they do poorly, and Rick Lovato has never been noticed. That is the biggest compliment that I can ever give him. What other guys can I shout out? Avonte Maddox, one of my favorite stories on the whole Eagles team. He has been an incredible nickel corner every time that he's been healthy, which has been never in his Eagles career. He is permanently injured, but one of the biggest defensive plays of the game, beyond the sacks, beyond the pick six, when it was still that 27-0, and it's like early in the third quarter, it's still lingering in your head. Well, it's only 4 touchdowns. Surely they can get 4 touchdowns. And they had that 4th and 3. DeAndre Hopkins, future Hall of Famer, does his classic, it's 4th and 3, I'm doing a 5-yard out. There's nothing you can do about it. Except Avonte Maddox fucking closed that shit down, swatted it away. He had his Super Bowl moment. There's just so many guys. Grant Calcaterra had a very bad drop. He's a guy too. But listen, the drop doesn't matter.
No one will remember that.
No one will remember that guy for that. What else? Big Dom DeSandro, front and center, as Sirianni walks out to get the Andy Reid handshake. We love Dom DeSandro, Guy of the Year, 2024 runner-up. I said this in our chat, and I'll just say it again here. 52, for me, was obviously just an incredible catharsis, but the vicarious joy that I feel for all of these guys on this Eagles team is so much more this time around, because it was just that much more personal for all of them to get back to the mountaintop, to deal with 2 weeks of three-peat talk. And, truthfully, I mean, again, if you heard how confident I was, you didn't have to watch it all. But the second Cooper DeJean took that pick six back, It was over. It was over in that moment. Pat Mahomes got sacked. He finally escapes the pocket, and he throws a pick six.
If I may say, the Zach Bond one. Okay, now it's over. The second pick for the first play from scrimmage. Okay, now it's truly well and over.
I mean, and there were just so many different plays where it was over, because you had those. You had the kill shot to Devontae Smith, which the second that Jalen went play action, I just started screaming kill shot at my watch party. And people probably thought I was a little bit of a maniac, and I definitely was, but that kill shot to peel back the curtain, the strip sack. Oh, what a call by Kevin Burkhardt, by the way. What more does Mahomes have left? He's hit, fumbles, Eagles ball. Jalen Carter with definitely a roughing the passer, but you know what? Pat Mahomes is the boy that cried roughing the passer. And I'm so glad that Jalen Carter got to get that hit on him. Moro Ojomo, a 7th-round pick 2 years ago. I think he had a sack and a half in that game. Josh Sweat made himself millions of dollars. Milton Williams, who had that strip sack, made himself millions of dollars in that game. I could just keep going down the whole roster. But most importantly, I wanted to shout out all of those guys in the periphery. And like Oren Burks, I think really is the most fascinating story because he's the reason the Niners lost last year. Straight up, he is. And the fact that Kelsey was able to abuse that mismatch. But for him to have that redemption, for the whole city of Philadelphia to have that redemption, and just to know how many horrible people felt very sad because
all
of what
the
Philadelphia
worst
did.
people in the world hated that and the halftime show.
And the only other thing that I'm going to say, because if you only watched the broadcast, you may have fell for it, but this was a Fox broadcast Super Bowl that pumped in cheers and took out the boos for Donald Trump. He was booed. He was booed. It was a Philadelphia crowd that was clear in all other instances, and there is no world in which a Philadelphia crowd was going to cheer for that motherfucker. Bad things happened in Philadelphia for Donald Trump, like him getting booed by, what do you think, 4-1? I think 4-1 ratio is fair.
I think it was probably closer to half and half. That being said, it was closer to that than the broadcast indicated.
Well, so the biggest tell to me...
We have to remember the average wealth of the person that does attend the Super Bowl. That's the one thing we do need to keep in mind.
And that's totally valid, but when the Chiefs were introduced, it was... I was shocked at how loud the boos were.
Oh, yeah. For everything that was game-related, 4-1.
Right. And also shout out, Bradley Cooper was, asked to do that intro, which I thought was just so gratuitous and frankly dumb. But Bradley Cooper is authentic Philadelphian. He really just played himself in Silver Linings Playbook. And when they asked him to do it, he said, I'm not going to do it unless I can bring my buddy Declan, who had a viral video where he gave away $1,000 to everybody in the Dollar Tree and then got tickets to the NFC Championship game, got tickets to the Super Bowl. And Bradley Cooper said, I'm not going to do this blatant fan service unless you let me bring my boy Declan with. It was just beautiful, man. And let's be real now. The Eagles have been to 2 of the last 3. They would have won the first one if not for the sod father. This could be the era of green. I think it might be the era of green.
If I may. RTGLES Retuggles.
It's exactly that. That was actually what Mayor Parker was going for. She just got a little too mixed up in all the excitement. So, no, it's beautiful. It will last forever. My only regret is that I am in Ohio for work, and I'm going to miss the parade. But you know what? I'm not that upset because there's going to be more. And that was exactly what Jalen Hurts said to Devontae Smith on the sideline. There's going to be more. Black excellence on display. Jalen Hurts, Kendrick Lamar, the whole event. It makes you proud to be a Philadelphian.
Okay, now that Diaz has gotten all of that out of his system, Xavier, what is making memories for you?
So it's not as exciting as the Super Bowl, but I do want to say that I'm very happy that the whole insane Sam Kerr lawsuit, criminal trial,
I saw that, yeah,
is finally done, and Kerr has been acquitted. For those who don't know, this is possibly the dumbest story of all time. So Sam Kerr, the captain of the Australian women's national soccer team, was arrested and charged with racially aggravated harassment of a police officer. What happened here and what came out through the trial, where they, aired like a full 35 minutes of this interaction along with tons of other evidence. Sam Kerr and her wife, Christy Mewis, the U.S. women's national team player, who, if you all remember, they were the pair that had that iconic photo that was about good sportsmanship, showing sportsmanship to, defeated opponent. And they were just like together.
It's the sports version of like any of the old female poets and stuff that were just roommates, just close friends.
Yeah, they were just really good friends.
It was a Boston marriage.
Fiance, by the way. I did confirm fiance, not wife yet. But they were out in London 2 years ago. They went for a night out, tried to get an Uber home, couldn't get one. Finally got into one of the London black cabs, the full London taxis. Apparently got a little sick, threw up, argument about paying for, costs, did agree to end up to pay for the costs. Then the driver didn't trust them or didn't believe them, and instead locked the doors and started driving them at high speeds to the police station. And while in the back of the cab, they're freaking out, not knowing where this guy's taking them, and they call the police as well, saying that they're afraid for their lives. They think they're getting imprisoned. They try to break out of the back of the taxi. The driver then says, they also owe me money for the damage to my window. At the police station, Sam Kerr and Christy Mewis are, as the video at the trial showed, fearful. They were scared of what was going to happen. They had called the police, and the police, didn't listen and just hung up on them at first. And during the course of this 30-plus minute conversation, Sam Kerr's getting more and more frustrated that they're not listening to them, and starts calling the officer essentially a dickhead, and then says, "You're stupid and fucking white." Sam Kerr, for those who don't know, mixed race, Anglo-Indian, has spoken openly about racist abuse that herself and her family have suffered. Nothing happens after this. 11 months later, the police officer amends his written statement to the Crown Prosecution Service and says that he felt like he was racially abused and belittled when she said that he was stupid and white. So a year after this whole incident ended, they bring charges against Sam Kerr for, again, racially aggravated harassment. They spend thousands in taxpayer money on having this big showy trial, only for the jury to say, "This is fucking stupid. Why are you wasting everyone's time on this?"
The thing that we always forget about with racism is that racism is prejudice plus power, right? That is what it is at its core.
Sure.
I think you could say Sam Kerr was maybe a little prejudiced against the white cop. And why wouldn't she be? When you look at, I'm just gesturing at the history of the world. Why wouldn't she be? I think it is a perfectly fine prejudice to have. So I'm glad that justice was served in that case.
And so I am thrilled that Sam and Christy can finally put this behind them to focus on the fact that they are about to have a baby very shortly. And also, maybe if a police officer amends their statement 11 months later, after having not even mentioned the fact that he was called white before, and says, "Oh, I felt bad and I felt like I was being racially abused because she called me white," maybe don't try to charge someone with a crime for that. But I don't know. That's just me.
I mean, I don't think it's just you. But no, I'm very glad to hear that worked out. It is nice that there are some of those stories with good endings. I've got one, if you don't mind, that is just pretty much exclusively good. I think we've all wondered at some point in our lives how exactly Stevie Wonder takes in a basketball game. Stevie Wonder famously, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Stevie Wonder famously big basketball fan. I hope that Stevie Wonder will get to find his way to a Blazers game at some point this season, because the Blazers are the first team now to offer it all home games beginning in January. This is something that's been going on for a little bit. I admit, a little late to the party, but I found out about it recently. They are, for anyone with any kind of sight disabilities, offering a device that has been developed by a Seattle company called One Court that is providing the first in-arena tactile sports broadcast. Now, you may be wondering, what does that mean? And that is an excellent question. They are handing out these tablets that are a little bit thicker than, an iPad, but roughly the same dimensions as something like an iPad. And on there's the diagram of, in this particular case, a basketball court. Though the company One Court has also worked to develop ones for football, develop ones for baseball. They did some testing out during the All-Star game recently for Major League Baseball. But now they're going to have them at all Portland Trail Blazers home games going forward. And they use haptic feedback. Haptic feedback is the fancy way of describing the rumble in a video game controller, or the weird touch settings you get with your text on a phone before you immediately disable that within 5 minutes of getting the phone. Because I don't know about you, I personally don't like that on my phone. In addition to this, they've got headphones, they give you the play-by-play, and you know what? I'm actually just going to let U.S. Paralympian judo athlete Anthony Ferraro describe a little bit more about how this goes.
It's all about to change with the one-court tactile broadcast. I'm about to watch the entire game through my fingers and my ears. We have a status button that tells me the score, how much time's left, all what's going on, which is really a big deal because I don't have to ask my sighted friend 1,000 times, hey, what's the score, what's the score? And then we have these buttons for tutorials for anyone going to use this device for the first time. So easy a blind man could do it. It uses real-time data with haptic feedback and audio to let me know exactly what's going on in real time. The ball is vibrating in real time and I can follow it on the court here with my hands. It tells me when someone shoots, and then if they make it, the hoop will vibrate twice. I never realized they even move around the court that fast. You don't understand. I've been at basketball games having no idea what's going on, like cheering for the wrong team. This is revolutionary, and the Trailblazers are the first team to adapt this in the NBA. We need everyone to do this.
So that video that Anthony Ferraro put out, that is how I first heard about it. And it was great just to look into, like, this has been done with other sports. As I said, they've tried it with baseball. They've tried it with football. I'm surprised that basketball is like the one that they have been able to kind of dive into the most first, just with the pace of play. I would have thought something like baseball, a little bit of a slower sport, would have been an earlier one. And of course it was at the All-Star game previously, but it's just incredible. I mean, God, imagine that. Expanding the availability of sports to people in this day.
Sorry, that's banned. It's illegal in America now. Sorry, James.
It's not in Portland. Truly, like, look, I don't have any particular affection or disaffection. I'm neutral to the Portland Trailblazers, but I'm just really, really psyched that they have this going forward. And I'm just glad that such a thing exists. And I'm glad that someone like Anthony Ferraro can enjoy sports a little bit more. Sports are for everybody. We feel very strongly about that. And the good news is that is an attitude that is shared by some friends of ours that we are about to welcome onto the show. We previously welcomed them onto the show. We are again in that weird period where all of these segments that we're going to debut have happened weeks prior. But a couple of weeks ago, the three of us had an absolutely phenomenal time bringing on our friends from the 1988 Tops podcast, Matt Kuzma and David McEllis, and no reason to beat around the bush any further. Let's go ahead and throw to that segment now. Ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, we are going to take a moment to time travel now, not just back to when we recorded this next portion, but back to the yesteryear of Die Hard, George Michael, Kids in the Hall. We're going back to 1988, and we've got two perfect guides to do that with us. Please welcome to the show the hosts of the 1988 Tops podcast, David McEllis and Matt Kuzma. Hey there, guys. How you doing?
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hey, great to be here.
So for people who have not necessarily heard of the 1988 Tops podcast, which is, I think, pretty much what it says there on the label, but if that's insufficient for someone, how would you guys put the show towards a new listener?
We are going to talk about every single card in the 1988 Topps baseball set, and we also made the decision that we were going to include the traded set. So that's 792 cards plus 132 cards. That's we're going to be done in like 2035, 2040, I think, hopefully, sometime before the heat death of the universe.
That's very optimistic timing right there. You know, our tagline is that every card has a story to tell, and I think that our show is a great pair for yours because we talk about a bunch of guys. I mean, each episode is a different guy on the front of a card, and he's got a great story back there, and we've had some really wild ones. We've also had some shows where we thought, oh, we can't talk about this guy for half an hour. We'll probably need to put two guys in here. But instead, it ends up that there's a secret back life of that guy, and we find out all about their life, but also learn a lot more about the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s and what was going on in society then. So it's been a really fun lens to see the world through.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I was very drawn to that ethos of we are going to get incredibly granular about every single one of these players, regardless of their pre-existing public perception. It's very much like there is something important about everyone. I wonder, was the idea did you think we're going to zoom in on this level on a single season before you came up with 1988? Or was there something about this year in particular that drew you guys to it?
So this is my bad idea. I used to always tell people at parties, like as an icebreaker, Like you can have an icebreaker question. You can ask people like, what's your job? What do you do? What do you care about? What are you listening to? I would ask people, what would you do a podcast about? And then when they would answer something vague, I would say like, could you give me something more specific? And my answer would then be, I'm going to talk about 1988 Topps baseball cards. And I think, one, I love baseball. Not so much now because I'm a White Sox fan, but at a time I loved baseball. Specifically, that time was when I was 8 years old in 1988. And I collected these baseball cards. That was the first year I collected baseball cards. I didn't collect cards for that long, but I would then stare at the back of them. And other things I like are statistics, weird math things, geography. So learning about what city somebody's from, like, oh, that's the capital of Vermont. Learning about the different places that they're from, and then also looking at the different teams that they played for. And that also opens up a world of geography nerddom that little me was very interested in. And so I thought it was funny, but we also, I don't think when we started really had a plan of what we were going to do. And then it took a few episodes before we kind of figured out how it was going to flow, and that really you could do a biography for 200 plus episodes now we're at.
Yeah, and it also helps that there's an entire society of American baseball research of people who make it their life's passion and work to do biographies of every single baseball player. So as members of SABR, like, we are happy to podcast on the shoulders of giants, using the stories that we find in other sources to help tell that story in a podcast format. And we find some real gems. I came to this as someone who, in 2020 had some time on his hands. And when David told me about the idea, I'd done radio and podcasts before, but I thought this would be a really fun project to get started. Little did I know that there would be 900 weekly episodes. And then when I started doing the math on that, yeah, it's a commitment that we've made that will last until hopefully our retirement. We'll see. I think over the holidays, there was a high school junior who was a cousin of my wife's, and I was telling his dad about the podcast because he's right in the sweet spot of our audience. And the kid was like, "Oh, but you should do one about 2017 because blah blah blah." And I said, "No. When you're my age, you're going to do that show, and I can't wait to hear it when I'm really old." So I think. It's an idea that now has turned into something special for us, and we love doing it.
Now, I do largely enjoy the aesthetics of the 1988 Topps line. I do want to just real quick pull out for an example. We've got an Orioles Eddie Murray here, number 495 of your roughly 900. And it's nice. It's a good font choice. I think they do a lot of interesting layering with this line. They've got, for this example in particular, the Orioles team name is slightly obscured by Eddie's helmet. There's a tiny corner of negative space at the bottom. It's a nice aesthetic line. However, it is operating the shadow of what is, for my money's worth, the single greatest trading card line of all time, which is 1986 Topps, in which I also have an Eddie Murray here presented. The 1986 line is one that has this bizarre colored block font on black background. And do you ever have a discussion about what is the place of the 1988 Topps line? 1988 is, I'm going to say, a lot better than the year preceding it, 1987, which is basically all of this just with wood paneling like a station wagon.
That's a controversial statement. You're going to get in trouble for that one.
I'm very anti-1987. I'm very anti-1987 Topps. I'm happy to have a hot take there.
I think you're right. And 1986, I think, was the first year so I was 6 and I actually bought those cards. I remember going with my grandma to the new Jewel that opened, where she called it the Jewels. We went to the new Jewels and I bought some 1986 Topps, but I didn't have that many of them. We readily acknowledge that the 1988 Topps set is one of the most hated. I think people really don't like it. Yeah.
It's seen as very generic. And then the Project 70 cards that came that rehashed that style, or that remixed that style, I should say, turned out to be really good ones. So the Steve Sachs was really good. What was the other one? The Hank Aaron,
beautiful
1988 Topps remake. That was, it was remixed. And the Steve Sachs. That's a That's lovely. I mean, you just have to reimagine it a bit, but yeah, I think that you've hit on some of the things we like, which is we like the depth of that. You know, the thought of just Braves, the bat over an R. You know, there's just something really nice about that. When you start getting into after the junk wax era and you start getting to the shiny cards, I really lost a lot for me. So I'm a couple of years older than David. So once it got to like I was 13 or 14, a lot of this I lost interest in. So because it was just too shiny, too expensive, and I moved on to, you know, Magic the Gathering. I was that kind of nerd.
All my Magic cards are right behind me in that cabinet right there. So, Matt, I didn't know that. We've never discussed this.
I don't,
Nor have we played.
my black white deck. I'll bring it over next time.
We got
Look at
Pokemon.
that. See, there we go. I love it.
So I get I have one last question, Xavier Diaz. I don't know if you have anything you want to poke at before we head into that one. So one other thing, something that we love about this show is 1 week we can talk about baseball, 1 week we can talk about football, 1 week we can talk about basketball. And in fact, we try really hard to not repeat any sports within a single episode. We do try really hard to make it this big varied thing. And I took a look. Unfortunately, there's not a 1988 Topps NBA set because I think, frankly, like NBA cards aesthetically are just better, at least during that period of time. But there is a pretty nice looking 1988 NFL set. It's got an interesting gradient of the team's primary and secondary colors behind all the team names. Have you ever considered, are we able to branch out under the same? I know 900 episodes is a lot already. I know it's not as though you haven't filled your plate with a lot of stuff. But is there ever an urge to kind of stretch out beyond just baseball?
I think that for official shows, I don't think that we would ever do that. But I mean, we are season ticket holders for Chicago Fire. David and I and a third guy have tickets together. I was just in Rio and went to the Maracanã and saw a game there. It's freaking legit. It's just awesome. I love all sports. I love obscure sports. I was also a kid in high school who, you know, ESPN would show cricket late at night. And I was like, well, how does this game work? And I would just stay up and like try to like do the math and back into how cricket worked by watching the scoring and then seeing what happened. So, I mean, I would totally listen to a podcast like ours about some other sport, even if it wasn't my favorite, just to see what it was like. But I think that I like all sports and would be happy to talk about a card, but I'm not committing to any more than the 900 episodes I've already committed to.
Well, one that you just pointed out, the 1988 Topps football set, does have a player who is in our set, so we will definitely talk about the 1988 Topps Bo Jackson football card, where he is a top super rookie. And I remember, I think I still have that card in a plastic case because I believed that it was going to be incredibly valuable. It did not pay for my law school, unfortunately. But what Matt was saying, I was listening to one of your older episodes where you were talking about curling. Matt's also a curling enthusiast. And then one of the more recent ones you were talking about, Shogi.
That was our Mind Sports episode where I wanted to be different, so I had us talk about things that do not require athletic competition, but more mental and strategy games. So,
see, now if they have cards, maybe we could talk about that.
I guess we have one, the guy who did World Series of Poker. Oh my goodness, the name's escaping me, and Cantor's probably very upset with me right now.
Henry Ornstein?
Henry Ornstein is it exactly. There we go. Sorry.
That was the episode I was just listening to yesterday while doing laundry.
And with that, I mean, I think it's time for us to bring some new guys into the Pantheon and allow you guys to do what you have listened to others do. Who wants to start?
I'd be happy to. I'm happy to nominate a guy who is one of only 55 guys in all of Baseball Reference whose last name starts with a Q. Now, you know, of the 55 Qs, there's also a guy in there just named Quinn, just the single name Quinn from 1875, played in 2 games. He was listed from parts unknown. We don't really know much about Quinn, but this is a different Q. This is Dan Quisenberry. Dan Quisenberry is
as soon as you said Q, I had a feeling this is exactly who it was going to be.
Yeah, Dan Quisenberry was a I'd say we're picking a couple guys who we'd say are quirky relievers. And our show is all about, baseball players of all kinds, but when you got guys from the bullpen who have big characters, larger than life, in whatever the way is, that's the role they have to play on the field. And that's the role that they play on our show too. So Dan Quisenberry was that guy. He was born in Santa Monica. He grew up in California, had an older brother named Marty, who was also a baseball player and also a submarine pitcher. We love submarine pitchers, by the way. They're the very best baseball cards to see of pitchers because you get to see that action. Seeing Dan Quisenberry in that submarine style was just awesome to see. More family background. Mom wanted he and Marty to grow up and be ballroom dancers, but it was not meant to be. When she remarried, the parents divorced, and when she remarried, stepdad was like, no, these kids need to get into baseball hard, and it worked. Older brother Marty ends up going to Orange Coast Community College, and from there ends up getting picked up by the Royals. He gets hurt and kind of flames out. But Dan, later known as Quiz, and what I will refer to him pretty much the rest of this way, he also followed in his brother's footsteps, same high school, same community college at Orange County. Orange County Community College, by the way, where Diane Keaton went to. So famous, really famous school. He transfers to Laverne College. A coach kind of recruits him there. And at that college, he really has an awakening, both on the baseball field, but he's a Renaissance man. He's very religious. He studies religion. He's also studying sociology, majoring in sociology, psychology, business, and history. So this is a 5-tool player in the classroom, 5 majors, and was encouraged by his coach as well to take up square dancing because the coach thought that it would improve his balance and footwork. Now, you might laugh at this. Saying,
everybody wants this guy to dance.
He's right. Mom says dance. Coach says dance. Well, guess what happens? He meets his future wife in the dance class. This, everything is it just shows you this guy has something special. On the baseball field at Laverne, Quiz was good. He was 12-2, then 19-7. And he was an NAIA All-American, but the scouts weren't really all that interested. So his coach decided to call the only scout, it seemed like, who could pick up a Quisenberry, and that was the scout who had signed his brother years before. There's a scout named Rosie Gilhausen. And Rosie says, I'll tell you what, there's a spot for our single-A Waterloo team if the kid can get to my house in less than an hour. And so Quiz, in his AMC Gremlin, gets to Rosie's house in 10 minutes and signs. He got $500 a month, and Quiz said his bonus was a Royals bat that Rosie had in his house, a Royals pen, and a Royals lapel pin. So that's a huge signing bonus. And Quiz makes his way to Waterloo, Iowa. This is 1975. I mentioned he's a religious guy. He gets baptized and has his first start on the same day. So he's ready for professional baseball and professional life. And he starts the game, gets a win, a complete game victory, and that's the only day he ever starts a game the rest of his career. The rest of his career, he is a reliever. He gets sent to the bullpen, even though he had a complete game. The coach just thought that the bullpen was the best chance for him. He didn't think it was likely either way, or maybe it was just fate, because he gets bumped up to Double-A that year, 2.42 ERA. 1976, he's still in Double-A. 77, 78, he's throwing ERA under 2 and still doesn't get called up. And by the end of 78, he's like, all right, I've been doing this 4 years. And he got a teaching license because he thought, if I don't make it to AAA, I'm just going to go be a teacher, probably teach religion or philosophy or poetry or something. Well, he gets assigned to AAA Omaha in 1979 spring training, and it doesn't take long. The Royals need an arm after an injury, and Quiz is the next man up in AAA. And the Royals GM says, the truth of the matter is that we didn't have anybody else. necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, she was the mother of Dan Quisenberry. I mean,
I think for a guy that's such a book nerd, it's very appropriate for his manager to be making a very verbose quote like that.
I mean, I lost it when I read it the first time. It is like... So 1979, he makes his first appearance in the bigs against the White Sox, gets the loss. George Brett, of course, Hall of Famer, had this to say about Quiz. He looked funny, he threw funny, he was funny, and I wanted to know why we didn't go out and trade for somebody. And now I know. And that's because Quiz came in his rookie season, he was good, pitching 32 games, got 5 saves and a 1.37 ERA plus. And April of that year, he pitched to Jamie Quirk for the first ever QQ battery in Major League history, and then would pitch to Todd Zeile for a QZ battery, first ever. Now, early in his career, he had one pitch, basically, which was a sidearm sinker. He had a fastball that was almost never over 80 miles an hour. So he's kind of one trick, and it's working okay. But then 1980 comes, and the Royals make a management change. You got Jim Fry as a new manager. Whitey Herzog is fired. And Fry had just coached the Orioles in the 1979 World Series. And he sees a submarine pitcher, and he's like, there's a guy we faced, in the 1979 series, Kent Tekulve. Maybe he can help this guy Quiz figure some stuff out. Because if he could become as good as Teak, then we'd really have something there. And Teak agrees. During spring training, Fry talks to Kent Tekulve and says, hey, we want this guy to be like you. He throws a little like you already, but basically he doesn't have shit. And so that was enough. Teak said, okay. He started by throwing even lower, dropping his arm even lower, just 6 inches off the ground. And this motion was described as a flamingo falling over. At first it didn't work, but then eventually he had a slider, changeup, had an occasional knuckleball to go with that 80-mile-an-hour fastball. And 1980, he had 12 wins, 33 saves, leading the league, 75 appearances as a closer. He came into 41 games in which the Royals were leading, and they won 39 out of 41. He gets votes for the Cy Young and MVP, and the Royals end up winning the AL West. They go to the ALCS against the Yankees. They've won the first 2 games in Kansas City. They go to New York for the sweep. And in the bottom of the 6th, it's 1-0 KC. And Quiz is brought in to shut it down, for the last 3 1/3 innings. And he ends up blowing the save. He gives up a single that scores the tying run, gives up the go-ahead run. But in the 7th, Goose Gossage gives up a dramatic home run to George Brett that puts the Royals up 4-2. Quiz gets out of some jams in the 8th and the 9th. And then in a poem that he wrote later, he wrote a book of poetry, this poem called A Career. He has several stanzas about major points in his life. And I'm just going to read from it. I was looking up when George Brett hit a Ruthian blast off a guy who threw as hard as God. Willie Randolph took a called third. Why didn't he swing? It was right there. And we were series bound. So, I'm getting chills already. We're only in 1980. Jim Fry pitched Quiz in every single game of the 1980 World Series against the Phillies. Pete Rose said, hey, this guy is giving us the World Series by letting us look at Quisenberry's delivery so much. And he was right. Quiz got a win and a save in games 3 and 4, but it wasn't enough. They lose to the Phillies in 6. 1981, the strike happens, and in the second half of the season, Quiz was great. The first half didn't go well, and he said that after some searching, he found a delivery. He said, I found a delivery in my flaw, and had 20 appearances in the second half of the season with an ERA of 0.79. 1982, he leads the American Leagues in saves again, the first of 4 straight seasons with that feat, walking 12 players in 136 innings, finishing 3rd in the Cy Young, and again gets MVP votes. And then he goes to pick up his Rolaids Relief Man of the Year and thanked the umpire Al Clark, who's in the audience, for giving me a National League strike zone, for the Royals pitchers who couldn't go 9 innings, and for manager Dick Hauser for not letting them. And Joe Piscopo in the audience said he was better than I was. That's high praise from one of the best characters of 1970s and 1980s Saturday Night Live.
This is what we suffer from having such a bimbo forward baseball, himbo forward baseball culture. Because like Nick Castellanos is great. Nick Castellanos can turn a phrase with the best of them, but he does it accidentally, and you can only get it so often, and most of them can't even do that. It is nice to have a baseball player that can turn a phrase.
Yeah. But wait, there's more. In 1983, he sets the record for most saves in a season with 45, obviously a record that was broken later, but 69 games, 139 innings, more than 2 innings per appearance as a closer, with only 11 walks in 139 innings, with 2 of them intentional. So walks per 9 innings, he's third all time. And if you take out the intentional walks, it's a kind of staggering how good his control was. He finished second in the Cy Young that year, 1983, with a 5.5 WAR, second only to Dave Stieb among pitchers that year. And Lamar Hoyt, who won the Cy Young, had a WAR of 3.7. So this is the era, guys, when wins were everything when it came to Cy Young. So Quisenberry, like, blatantly robbed, should have had the Cy Young, I think. 1984, more of the same. Second in the Cy Young, Rolaids Relief Man, third in MVP. But then we get to 1985, the peak of Quiz. This is what I mean when I say there's more. He was the fireman of the team, meaning Kansas City gets hot, gets real hot in the summer. He would spray fans with the hose on the summer days. So, like, there's just that connection at a human level with people in the bleachers when you spray the hose and it's 100 degrees out. I mean, it's just giving a relief to the masses. 85 was a very exciting season for the Royals. They won the AL West by 1 game over the Angels with a 91-71 record. Quiz leads the league with 37 saves, 2.37 ERA, but he had also blown 12 saves. So there's no cakewalk here. Like, it's not dominating, but there's still more to come. They face the Blue Jays in the playoffs. They go down 2-0 and then 3-1, but then came back to win in 7. Quiz had a loss in game 2, but closed out game 6 and 7 to help Kansas City get to the Show Me State Series or the I-70 Showdown Series or whatever kind of cross-state classic we want to say. This is against the Cardinals team with John Tudor, Jack Clark, Ozzie Smith, Andy Van Slyke. A great series. Quiz pitches in non-save situations in games 1, 2, and 4. All games go to the Cardinals, so the Royals are down again 3-1. Going into game 6, the game is tied 0-0 in the 8th inning, and Royals manager Dick Hauser leaves the starter, Charlie Leibrandt, in to go into the 8th inning. This game is played in St. Louis, so Leibrandt was even allowed to bat in the bottom of the 7th inning. So this is how long they left the starting pitcher in, was we'll go ahead and let him bat instead of bringing a pinch hitter and letting Quiz come in the 8th inning. And Quiz thought that this is what should have happened, but it didn't. So Leibrandt gives up a run in the 8th inning. Royals go down 1-0, brought in to get the last out in the 8th, and then put the Cardinals down in the 9th. The famous play of Don Denkinger, the first base umpire, making a bad call on George Orta, is in the bottom of the 9th inning. That lets the Royals score 2 on the play. And this is, to this day, Cardinals feeling that they were completely jobbed on this. Quisenberry is the pitcher of record, so he ends up getting the win. And then game 7 is a Brett Saberhagen complete game to win the series. And President Ronald Reagan calls, congratulates the team, makes the call into the victorious clubhouse. So this is, again, back in the day when, it's not like 2 months later you go to the White House. The president gets on the phone right then and is like, Great job, guys, especially Jim Quisenberry. And Dan Quisenberry, upon hearing this, says, thanks a lot, Don. So that's the peak. From then on, things take a turn down in many ways. 1986, the manager gets a brain tumor, leaves the team. 1987, Quiz's role is reduced to only 8 saves, and then was released on July 4th, 1988. 1989, he signs with the Cardinals and has a 2.64 ERA, but pitching in a lot fewer games. And in 1990, he signed a 2-year deal with the Giants and only appeared in 5 games with a 13.5 ERA, so he decides to retire. From the same poem, A Career, he wrote, I was looking up when I sat at a table with reporters, telling them I quit. Telling myself, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. I didn't want to break the unwritten code of big leaguers. It lasted so long. It went so fast. It seems like yesterday. It seems like never. On a snowboarding trip in early 1998, Quiz started to have blurry vision. He thought it was from falling on the slopes, but he got it checked out, and it turns out it was a tumor, a malignant and aggressive form of brain cancer. Having seen what happened to his old manager, he knew that he might not have much time left. And his kids, who were now 18 and 16, were driving him around. He said, I feel like a dog. I get to stick my head out the window and let the wind flap my ears. I love it. It's great. In May of 1998, he was inducted into the Royals Hall of Fame. His head was shaved. He was slowed by the disease, but his wit was still there. And, he got to see all the guys again. A reporter asked him if there was a lesson in all of this. And he kind of asked, what do you mean by this? And he said, your accomplishments and everything here. And he said, I don't think about those things because I needed so much help. I needed a great wife. I needed Willie Wilson in center. I needed a great second baseman like Frank White. We need each other. That's the lesson. And in 1998, in September, he died at age 45. This is a guy with an 80-mile-an-hour fastball that no one ever expected to be a pro. He led an extraordinary life that ended far too short. And from one last poem that he called Baseball Cards, he wrote, I look back at who I thought I was or used to be. Now, trying to be funny, I tell folks I used to be famous. I used to be good. They say, we thought you were bigger. I say I was.
It takes a decent amount for me personally to get past a lot of distaste for the city of Kansas City right now, but I have to say, Dan Quisenberry is a pretty good way to do it.
It's a really good cheat code to bring in an 80s submariner. I love Kent Colby. That love has been discussed on this podcast. And not only do you bring in someone very similar to Kent Colby, you bring to us someone who learned to do it from Kent Colby.
Kent Colby's Padawan.
That is a significant feather in the cap of Dan Quisenberry, among many other ones that we just learned about.
But we do still have to make another call to the pen, so we do have another reliever coming out. Let's see what you got, David.
And look, I don't like to have to pick among our guys, because they're all our guys. We got 934 guys, or however many. I always get the number wrong. It keeps going up. And Dan Quisenberry is absolutely one of my guys, too. Both of these are great choices, but they're also, I think, two choices that show the duality of the 1988 Topps podcast. And part of what makes 80s baseball fun, it's these characters. And we have some different groups of guys that we like to talk about. And we love the old guy pitcher, Kent Colby, the knuckleballers, Charlie Huff, those kind of guys. But it seems like relief pitchers end up being some of the better characters. And I have a document here called Why I Love Charlie Kerfeld. I'm going to drop a image of Charlie Kerfeld in, and this is going to be a dramatic tone shift from Dan Quisenberry, the intellectual, dancing, poem writing, relief pitcher with a big mustache. Charlie Kerfeld was a punk rocker with a Brian Bosworth haircut who loved drinking Busch beer. And while Dan Quisenberry pitched 12 seasons in the majors. Charlie Kerfeld pitched 100 games. In 2020, we talked about Charlie Kerfeld. I think we had maybe like 20 weekly listeners or something like that. And somehow around this time, somebody found us and more people started listening. And I think it's the Charlie Kerfeld bump. Charlie, he burned fast and bright. He was born in Knob Noster, Missouri. So 2 connections to Missouri here. Knob Noster, our knob. I think that's a hill.
It sounds like the closest kind of direct translation you're going to get. I'm sure there are other things that neighboring towns say instead.
Yes. He grew up, though, in Carson City, Nevada. Out of high school, he was drafted, but he said that he turned down $50,000 because he had a girlfriend that he didn't want to leave. So instead, he goes to Yavapai Community College. So we also have a lot of guys in the 1988 top set who went to community college and are drafted and end up making the leap to the majors. He was drafted again out of Yavapai in the first round of the secondary draft. He was drafted ahead of Cal Daniels and Randy Myers, guys who had, bigger stats, bigger careers. But Charlie Kerfeld was big. He was listed at 6'6", 225. If you watch video of him in 1986, he was bigger than that. Again, he's got the Brian Bosworth hair, the mohawk on top into a mullet in the back. He wore these giant glasses with transitions lenses on the mound, so he had sunglasses that turned into regular glasses when he came off. He chewed tobacco. He spit on the mound. He said, "I like to chew tobacco and see how dirty I can get the uniform. I spit all over myself. When I come into the game, batters say, 'Hey, look at that hog with spit all over him. He can't get anybody out.'" And that's part of how he tricked him.
This is the Nick Castellanos turning a phrase. This is a guy coming in and just saying the things that are on his mind, and in some ways it is as valuable as Quisenberry, but from a very different direction.
He was good for a quote, and some of these guys are good for a quote because I think now, like you said, modern baseball, they're coached, they're kind of kept aside, they're not allowed to be weird. And I think in the 80s, there were guys who were able to just say stuff, and we find some odd quotes. Charlie Kerfeld was good for those. And he was also good on the mound. In 1986, at least, he was good. He was 11-2 with a 2.59 ERA in 93 innings as a rookie. He got Rookie of the Year votes. The Astros won the National League West. He's in RBI baseball, so he is on one of the biggest Nintendo baseball games. He's on the Houston Astros in that win the NL West. Mike Scott threw a no-hitter to clinch that National League West title, and there's this raucous celebration at the Astrodome. Charlie drank all of the champagne. There's pictures of him spitting the champagne into the air in a fountain. He then starts pounding Busch beer, and much like Dan Quisenberry, he is keeping the crowd refreshed by throwing beer cans into the crowd. And occasionally, he and Larry Anderson, another reliever and then Phillies announcer, would wear conehead masks. And so there's a picture of him wearing this conehead hat mask thing, walking around the Astrodome, drinking Busch beer, wearing giant sunglasses. He goes into the clubhouse. He does a drunken interview. The interview then cuts over to Nolan Ryan. And Charlie comes over and starts pouring a Busch beer on the head of the noted chill dude, Nolan Ryan, who then shakes up his champagne bottle, sprays it in Charlie Kerfeld's face. And Charlie later said he was the only person who could actually get away with doing that to Nolan Ryan. Anybody else probably would have gotten punched. So Charlie has this brash personality as well. In the NLCS, he catches a Gary Carter bouncer up the middle behind his back. And then I think he was so surprised that he caught the ball that he grabs the ball out of his glove and shows it and points at Gary Carter before throwing him out, which elicited all sorts of angry comments from the Mets at the time. The Mets end up winning that series in 6, going on to win the World Series. But Charlie burst onto the scene. So after that season, his contract is up. He was on $65,000 a year. He wanted a raise to $150,000. He and Jim DeShays had similar service time, so the Astros offered them the same amount. $110,000. Well, Charlie, he had a demand. He wanted more. He was number 37, so he asked for $110,037.37. And he also included in that contract 37 cases of Jell-O, orange.
Okay, there we go. I was curious if he was specific about the color/flavor.
He
For the
said he
Astros,
wanted
it
the
makes sense.
Jell-O. Of course, you have to specify. There was an interview with him recently with Harold Reynolds, where Harold Reynolds said, "So you included 37 boxes of Jell-O?" And Charlie said, 37 cases of Jell-O. He said, "I wanted the Jell-O so Larry Anderson and I could pull a prank on some coaches or unsuspecting reporter this season. When they least expect it, they might find some orange Jell-O in their toilet or whirlpool or something." He said, "I chose orange because we won't be wearing our orange uniforms anymore." Charlie said he liked the way that he looked in the Astros orange uniforms, and he was mad that they were changing away. And I think we can all agree that those uniforms are a classic.
So a coworker of Mike Scott was pulling pranks on people at work with Jell-O, just to clarify that is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if he was putting staplers in it, but I'm also interested, and I don't want to try this at home. If you put Jell-O in your toilet, will it turn all of the water to Jell-O? I believe that's what Charlie's implying, but I'm not going to test it. I don't know a plumber.
Unless you're running boiling hot water through that toilet, I don't think that's happening.
Well, he's definitely a character. He asked for this. He ends up getting this Jell-O. There was another story where he promised that he would buy 3,000 tickets for some kids to a game, and then he realized that would have cost him thousands of dollars, and so he had to back off of that. He said he was going to buy 3,000 tickets, and then they told him, you're not getting a discount on those tickets, and he had to actually, he tried to do a nice thing, and then realized.
So he did a Scott's tots. So we're continuing the bad office plot lines that he has been able to work into his career here?
Or they were just big Charlie Kerfeld fans.
There we go.
He was caught on camera ordering ribs delivered to him while he was in the bullpen at Shea Stadium. He was fined $250 for that one. He set his hat on fire after a loss. He would wear T-shirts under his uniform, including the Jetsons, the Flintstones, Twisted Sister, AC/DC, the Go-Go's, and Twisted Brother. And Twisted Brother was his own band. He said he played lead air guitar. When asked what he would do after baseball, he said, "Arena football is first, then World Wrestling Federation, maybe go back to college and get a brain surgery degree, or become an assistant clubhouse man, or go to Harry Wendelstadt's umpiring school." When asked what he would do if he had 1 week to live, he said, "I'd get Hulk Hogan, Brian Bosworth, Charles Barkley, and I'd have a 4-man tag team match with the Four Horsemen." So a big wrestling guy. Again, why people are asking him these questions, I think they just knew, he's going to tell me something weird. So after that 1980, so we only got through one season. Matt got through a full decade with Quiz. Really, Charlie Kerfeld had one season. In 1987, he was bad. His ERA was over 6. He gets sent to AAA and then played briefly for Atlanta in 1990, but that was it. That was his entire career. So in actuality, in retirement, he went into coaching. So this guy who is best known for chugging Busch Lights is actually a pretty successful coach in the independent leagues, and then a special assistant and a scout for the Phillies for many years. So I present for your consideration the air guitar playing, Busch Light drinking, wrestling fanatic relief pitcher, the incomparable Charlie Kerfeld.
Incomparable is a good word there. That is completely devoid of any moral estimation of it. It is simply, yes, he is indeed incomparable. This is 2 good selections. Guy-bunal, what do we think early on here?
So I already talked about my enjoyment of Submariners. I also did not expect to be Googling what happens if you put Jell-O in a toilet, but apparently it is a thing. It is a legitimate prank that has been pulled. And
do you have to put it in the basin above the toilet, or do you just put it straight up in the toilet bowl?
You put it in the toilet bowl. You get someone out of the house for a couple hours. It apparently takes 2 to 3 hours to harden. And then when they go to the bathroom, as long as you use clear or lemon Jell-O, they will not notice until it is too late. And apparently all it takes is a plunger to fix the horrible, horrible problems this would cause. But apparently it is a known thing, and now I'm thinking about this man doing this with orange Jell-O and trying to figure out how terrified you would be if you woke up after, going to sleep overnight, you go to the bathroom, and you look down and you see that on like that plus orange. And I am horrified by this mental image.
Diaz, how do you feel about toilet Jell-O? Or the two guys. If you don't want to talk about toilet Jell-O, we can go back to the baseball players.
I appreciate the ingenuity and pranks, in a day and age when we hear about all the horrible things that Shaquille O'Neal did in past his comedy, like Jell-O in the toilet, legitimately funny. I will 100% give that. The mental image I kind of settled on for Charlie Kerfeld, because I did try to make a comparison, and I would compare him to like a Southern Wild Thing is kind of the energy that I get.
Yeah.
Like, take him out of the California penal system, put him onto a ranch somewhere in the South. This is who we would have had. This is who Rick Vaughn would have became.
It is a very different career to look at the backs of these cards in 1980 in particular. You all have provided us with that information to look at Quisenberry's, which is, like you said, a decade of Major League production, and to look at Kerfeld's, which needs to use several years of minor league statistics. He has Asheville and Columbus and Tucson listed on here many times. I didn't know how different the two would be able to be. And before this, we tried to kind of set a bit of a benchmark to be thinking about relief pitchers in this era, because most of these pictures for the 1988 Topps line would have presumably been taken the season before, correct? So, if you look at the 1987 season to think about the relievers that would have been going on while these guys were doing the work that would later be immortalized by your work with the 1988 Topps, I decided to see, like, who's the guyest reliever I can find in this season. And what I did was to look for the player who has the most appearances with between 0 and 0.5 WAR. That, to me, felt like, let's get a measuring stick. Does anyone have a guess before I say who that player is? It is Lance McCullers Sr. Lance McCullers had 123 and a third innings that year. That is 25 more than the next reliever with the most innings and within that range of WAR from 0 to 0.5. 78 games that year, 41 games finished, 0.0 WAR exactly in 123 and a third innings.
We covered Lance McCullers Sr. He was a guy. He was nicknamed the Baby Goose because he came after Goose Gossage. And yeah, that's all I remember about him. We've done 200 plus of these. Aside from a famous son, Lance McCullers Sr., he's a guy.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to use here to be my guiding light. If I thought of him prior to this as that mold that we are comparing these two with, I love Quisenberry's story. I love that he is apparently the progenitor of the Homer hose that the Orioles and Mr. Splash have made so much use of recently. I love that he is probably as anti-Reagan as I can find for any Major League Baseball player of that time. We'll take what we can get. And to tie it back for a moment to The Office, as I made some references there with Charlie Kerfeld, my immediate memory of Dan Quisenberry is this video that was playing, on the Jumbotron at an Orioles game one time, because you're there an hour before game time. They're just playing like MLB content. A frequent guest star on The Office, David Koechner, plays, what is his character's name in The Office? Todd Packer. Plays Todd Packer in The Office. Friend of Michael Scott, teammate of Charlie Kerfeld. David Koechner has this just like 10-minute video talking about how his favorite baseball player of all time was Dan Quisenberry. That was my introduction to Dan Quisenberry. I never saw him play, but I got to see this guy who was like David Koechner himself on television, a great guy, because the fact that we can say his name, David Koechner, and it means nothing to probably many people that have seen his face. That is a very guy recognized guy moment. And Kent Tekulve training him, as Xavier, you said, that is a very guy recognized guy moment. With that being said, if I'm going in here and thinking like, okay, Lance McCullers is the bell curve of guy in this year, of those two, Charlie Kerfeld does seem to kind of fit that mold a little bit more. I don't know, Xavier Diaz, if like you want to interpret this differently, but in that way, I start to lean Kerfeld.
I can still be swung either way. I do like both. The more I think about Kerfeld, I think about Kenny Powers at Eastbound and Down. I don't know.
He looks a lot like Kenny Powers now, actually.
And that it's making me feel like I'm not a man of my word, because I talked so openly about how much I liked the Quisenberry story with the Kent Colby references, that information there. But I don't know, something about Kerfeld. I was just kind of smiling the whole time. And I don't know. It's rare that we have something like that where just every part of his story was a banger. It's short but sweet, and I kind of like that.
Is it possible that is Dan Quisenberry too good to be a guy? He was great.
So I think if you look at the 1988 card, yes, I think that's a very interesting thing about looking at Dan Quisenberry through a 1988 lens. Because you look at the back of this card, and it's just going up to like those two kind of declining years with the Royals, but you've got right there in the thick of it those 4 straight years leading the league in saves. You look at that, you're like, how does this guy not have another decade in him as a back of a bullpen piece? Whereas Charlie Kerfeld, again, there are 5 lines here that are teams that are not major leaguers.
Yeah, I go back and forth on the too good to guy for Quiz, because on the one hand, he was a blind spot for me before this, admittedly. The first time I heard this name was about an hour ago. And then you do see the accolades, extremely impressive, saves leader. But on the other hand, the lack of recognition from the Hall of Fame committee, coming up just short of staying on the ballot the first time around, going to the Veterans Committee, and then even the Veterans Committee, who should be smart enough to recognize the contributions, still looks past him. So I go back and forth on the too good to guy for Quiz. I don't think it's necessarily disqualifying.
I don't believe it's disqualifying at all. I think Dan Quisenberry is a guy, but I think Charlie Kerfeld better embodies the overall concept of guy. I'll be the first one to say it. I'm casting my vote for Charlie Kerfeld of the 3 of us.
Xavier, if you're leaning Charlie and you feel dirty, I can be the protest vote for Quiz. We can do it that way.
Either works. I could be the protest vote for Quiz, and you could be the vote for Charlie. It's up to you.
Or you could both outvote me if you both feel that way.
Wait, let's make this dramatic. You do your quiz, and then I'm gonna oscillate in the next 30 seconds while I listen to you.
As much as Charlie made me very happy, I loved Quiz's story very much, and it's the exact type of reliever that I love so much that I will cast my vote for Quiz.
All right, so we're 1-1 going to me, and truly it's about as close as it can get. We have a submariner on one end who's potentially too good to guy, potentially too verbose to guy, came up with a lot of good little poems. There's a lot to it. On the other side, we have the not quite career minor leaguer who had several cups of coffee up and down, who has his own interesting personality quirks. And it's silly, it's arbitrary, but this is what I come down to. When we think of the 80s, we think of mullets. And there's one of these guys that has a mullet. And I think when we're dealing with slim margins, we need to really focus in on these kind of larger scale things when we think of the era. And so if there is to be a guy who is the reliever of the 88 Topps collection, I do think it has to be Charlie Kerfeld.
I don't relish this victory.
Yeah, the jury has spoken, and I couldn't agree more. I love both these guys. I love all these guys, but Charlie Kerfeld is one of my favorite stories that we've found, and really proud that you guys have picked him.
I will recommend, folks, if you want to listen to an episode where you get to hear both Matt and I cry while reading poetry, go back and listen to our Charlie Kerfeld episode, or go back and listen to our Dan Quisenberry episode.
Yeah, well, I almost cried the second time too, but it's it doesn't happen often, but it can happen. It can happen when you get emotional like this.
And I think these two guys are excellent examples of the fact that there is so much more than just the stats. For Don, you would not know about all the majors. For Kerfeld, you wouldn't know about half the stuff in 86. But that's just two guys. There are hundreds more. Where, my friends, can people check out hundreds more of these guys if they're interested in it?
Search 1988 Topps Podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. We get hosted on Spotify, so if you want to find us there, you can also leave comments there. And if you have any requests, you can also email us at 1988topspodcast@gmail.com.
Well, thank you guys again for being on. Thank you to producer Craig and all the coders behind him for making the recording possible. Thank you to our musical director, Don Ham, for that lovely theme music. But most of all, thank you, dear listener, for checking in again. If you want to check out any of the stuff that we have, you can always go to bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. We've got our Big Joe Flacco Project Elite coming out, hopefully within a month by the time this is dropping. And that's all I've got for right now. But it has been a pleasure to once again be one of your hosts, James.
And I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
I'm 1988 Topps guy, Matt.
And I'm Conehead David.
And I'm Diaz, and the presentation I'm most looking forward to from you two, Guy Hoffman.